sufficiently appreciated area of education called memory and retention. And the reason, I guess I always like to say why my sessions are important, so I'm going to start with that. The reason I think that this is an important topic is because of the fact that, we certainly want our students to learn. We certainly want them to process, so to speak, in the moment. We are going to talk about how memory does help in the moment as well. Memory is important because at the end of the day, I would think we all want our students to hold on to what we teach, right? I don't think anybody feels good. You probably have had the experience. I know that I have. The experience of, I just taught it last week. I just taught it 2 weeks ago. Maybe even I just taught it 5 minutes ago. And whoosh, it was as if I never taught it. And so, besides the fact that there's that empty feeling, more importantly, don't we all want our students to be able to emerge from our classes really having advanced? So we can't ignore the aspect of memory. And I think the more we understand how we remember, the more we understand how we as teachers can facilitate strong memory and retention. And we're going to ask in a minute what the difference may be between the two, if there is a difference between the two. Those questions are going to ultimately help us, I think, have a more focused and useful conversation. So I would like for this to be interactive, like I said. Think, pair, share, for those of you not familiar, is where you think on your own, you pair with the person next to you, and then you share with the group. So you have over here 4 questions. Would anyone like to take a stab at number 1? What is memory? And if you can't define, I'm not looking for a dictionary type definition for now. Certainly if you have one, you're welcome to. Those of your smartphones have a slight advantage. But anyway, but on a more serious note, maybe some words that come to mind when you think of memory?
Routine.
Okay.
I saw that from that.
Well, that's all right. Look, I'll take whatever I can get. I'm sorry. Yes? Anyone else?
Past learning or past...
Past learning?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
You also said the word remember, but we didn't know if we could define what the word memory and remember are the same.
Right. Right. Well, they are related etymologically. I'm just not sure what the root means. Yes.
An experience.
Okay.
They remember an experience.
Sure. Experiential. Anyone else? Would anyone like to sort of tie it together, or now that we put a few words up on the board, something that you think could help us? By the way, before you respond, if I may, I want to broaden your definition for just a moment to also think about memory in the computer form. That's another piece of it.
Storage.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Right? Storage. But by the way, storage is only good if you're able to what?
Retain.
No,
well, retain.
have categories.
And then they both sort of.
You have to be able to abstract.
Okay, so I think you're looking for the word
Retrieve.
retrieve. Is that right? You have to retain and retrieve. It's good that it's in there, but it's only useful if you can get it. And we've all had that with our computers too, probably, right? I do that all the time. I go into the little start thing and I click on documents, and then where I think, the folder where I think it is, I write articles and whatnot, so I often don't know where I put this idea. So I'll start looking for some keywords or typing some keywords they think would belong in this content, and the computer will then find it for me. So it's another process. The question for us, of course, is how do we do it here? Right? We know to type it in, but it doesn't work as scientifically with our brains. Okay, so let's hold that question for the moment. By the way, it sort of gives, number 2 will feed back into 1. So let me ask you this. Just out of curiosity, let's use our thumbs for a second. Take the thumb that you feel more comfortable using. Could be the thumb you write with or whatever. Please put it here. And please be so kind as, if you think that memory and retention are basically one and the same, please keep your thumb up. If you think that they're fundamentally different in some way, please put your thumb down. There's no right or wrong per se. Nobody will be called out or embarrassed. Okay, so we're sort of mixed, which is interesting. By the way, for those of you who were with me earlier, that's another way to check for understanding easily and get everybody's feedback, which is nice. Because oftentimes we have a hard time doing that. Okay, would anyone like to elaborate? Someone from the thumbs up column category first? Would anyone like to explain why your thumb was up?
They forgot, it went down.
Yours went down?
They said they forgot, whoever had it up.
I see. Anyone?
because I just don't know the difference. I mean, I could theorize.
Okay.
I'm assuming there is a difference.
In other words, to the degree that this and maybe retrieval are really the essence of memory. By the way, that is how we typically use it, right? He or she has a good memory. So don't we mean that they are able to hold on to facts and details that most people can't, right? He has a photographic memory. So we're not talking about anything, I think, other than the ability to capture almost an image and then utilize that for retrieval purposes. Who would like to distinguish? Rabbi?
Well, once you put in retention.
Yes?
So I would usually think of short-term versus long-term.
Okay.
And of course, you've left out
Ooh, probably not a good color. Yes?
working memory, which is
Ooh,
a big one.
okay. There you go. That's the one I was looking for earlier. That's where I think my hint, I don't know if that cued it for you, but that's what I was intending. When we're talking about no and yes, if we define memory again as the ability to retain, then of course that's what retention means. But if we're talking about the ability to sort of hold ideas, keep them in front of us, imagine sort of like you're juggling concepts and you have to piece it all together as a computer will, right? I don't know how much technological sophistication you have, maybe more than me, and even whatever little I have is not very much. But I do know that there is something called working memory in your computer. And sometimes your computer will slow down if you have too many tasks running at once. Too many tasks running at once. Now for children who are diagnosed with various attention deficits and things like that, one of the things I think we know about them is that they seem to have a lot going on. They have a lot going on. You can't keep them here because their brain is sort of taking in too much stimuli. And all that stimulation ultimately detracts them from what you want them to focus on at the moment. As I mentioned earlier this morning, I believe research says that there are 2 billion pieces of information that our brain is processing every second. 2 billion, which I don't know how they can come to that figure. But it's an incredible, whatever that number is, got a lot of zeros on the back end. And the point is, everything from how our skin is taking in temperature, light, breeze, other let's call it weather-related conditions, sounds. And in most cases, we filter out. We block out, we don't attend to most of those. We can't. Nobody can attend to so much. You're walking on the street here in Manhattan, there's a lot going on. There's noise, there's cars, there's dogs, there's people, there's trees and birds and weather and other factors. You know, and the doorman, blowing his leaves or whatever they might be doing outside. What are you going to focus on as you're walking down the street? You focus on everything, you're going to be overwhelmed. So we attend to various things. How much can we hold in front of us with our working memory? How much can we have our students hold on to? We want them to retain this as we build upon it and then bring them back to it. All of these things are demands on our working memory. And that's an important piece. Thank you for that contribution. Okay, number 3. What are the implications of memory? This is a softball, everybody. A little toss. Anyone? Season's over, but I couldn't resist. Would anyone like to comment on this? The implications? I mentioned one before, but that might not be the only one. Please.
Well, we want our students to be able to retain the information and hold on to the information that we teach them.
Right, we want it to be long-term. Right, we want to feel as if we've made a contribution for ourselves. We also want them to be informed. Right, whether it's idios, klolios. I'm just curious, how many of you are Judaic studies teachers or administrators? And you teach general studies? Okay, thank you. So whatever that information is, you're teaching it because A, you value it, B, your school values it, hopefully the parents and the child value it as well. These are things we deem to be important. Every good citizen, every good member of Klal Yisrael, they should know X. Whether that X is information, whether that X is a skill, whatever that might look like. So there's no value in going through a process by which it's in one ear and out the other. We all recognize
But
it.
it's also,
yes.
you can't go to step 2 if you forget step 1.
Okay, so there's a sequential component. Not just sequential, but also sort of a build upon,
Still.
right? It builds one to the other. Excellent, thank you. Anyone else? Why does this matter?
Assessment.
Assessment. Okay, what do you mean by that?
You want to assess what they know, their knowledge.
Okay.
Their memory to production. What are they producing?
Okay. Well, let me play devil's advocate on that one for a second. What if they were able to retain it till the test and then they dropped it like a hot potato? And I say that facetiously, but
Which is often the case.
which is often the case, right? In fact, one test-taking strategy you might want to teach your students, it's, forgive the language, but it's called a brain dump. And a brain dump means you take the information and you put it in the margin of the test right when you get the test, because at that point it's still kosher. 5 seconds later, you pull a little paper out of the side pocket over there, that's treif, but this is kosher. And look, let's play by the rules we set. So at least let's give the children an opportunity to succeed with the test that we deliver. Okay, different conversation. But, so let me, I'm prodding a little bit.
My
'cause
students
I-
do that.
Fun.
And they do those tests.
Right, so have you succeeded? Here's my, I don't mean to do any soul searching here, but have you succeeded as a teacher, all of us, if you get to the test, they remember it for the test, and then a day or two later, it's all out the window, or a lot of it is out the window? What do you think?
No.
You don't think you've succeeded? Anyone disagree? You agree? We all agree. Okay, so you're right, you want to get to the assessment, but maybe let's call it the long-term, the summative assessment, yeah? The end-of-year assessment, at least, you know, to give us a fighting chance to feel like we're accomplishing something. Okay, so these are factors. Certainly you want a child to feel good about themselves. Self-esteem is important. A can-do attitude. The notion of, you know, I have the ability with effort, with fortitude, with whatever it might be, to achieve and succeed. By the way, a lot of the issue, as we will see, of retention is not in the storage, it's in the retrieval. It's not always about that it's not there anymore. It may just require different pathways by which to get back at it. So hopefully we'll get there. Number 4, expectations in terms of student retention. Right? If my students don't remember what I taught them for at least blank, I haven't succeeded. I don't know if we've ever said that before, but something to think about. Do we have any expectations in that regard? Or do we all throw in the towel and say, well, they're all dealing with informational overload as it is, so let me just be happy that they got through this unit and passed?
I think application applies to them before.
Okay. Would you like to elaborate?
Well, like you said before, if you've seen the show rash and now it comes up in a different way or a different process, but we've seen this before, I expect that they can pull upon that from the last lesson.
Great.
At least trigger something.
Okay. Do you do anything in order to promote that?
Highlighted, bold.
Okay.
I mean, things in terms of to point it out to them if they don't get it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You
Yes?
do logs of keywords and key phrases along the way, whether it be for a novel.
Sort of like an ongoing.
a character trait, or,
Beautiful.
whatever it might be.
Yes?
You review, constantly reviewing.
Okay, so we try, at least. I don't know if we have formal expectations, but I would think about it. Because I think that that's something that will help us. Again, why are we in this? We're in this to engage, we're in this to inspire. We're also in this for them to learn content and skills, hopefully for the long haul. Okay, now, let's talk about this for a moment. Why do we, as citizens of the United States, for those who are old enough and remember Kennedy's assassination, why does that hold up? Well, let me ask you like this. For those, I think there are a few people in our room who did experience it. Do you still, would anyone here like to speak to your recall of it today? Either in terms of what you can share about where you were, what you could share about anything about that time. Anyone? So let's broaden it to everybody else. 9/11. 9/11. How about that? Okay. So would anyone like to tell me a detail about 9/11? That where they were, who they were speaking to when they first found out? Anything? Yes?
I was buying glasses in an optical store, and they had like a screen on, and everyone was saying that's impossible, that's not happening, it's not happening. And I'm like, where should I be right now? I shouldn't be buying glasses, I should be making sure everything's okay.
And you were here in New York City?
In New Jersey.
New Jersey, okay. I was in Chicago at the time, but the screens were on there too.
Right.
Anyone else? Yes?
I remember I'm a preschool director, and the mothers were just then dropping off their children to school. And I remember them coming in, holding their kids' hands, saying it in front of them. They were like just distraught, and they were going crazy, and they were just telling me planes. I did not know what they were talking about, but just by their, you know, how upset they were, and the children were all like wondering what's going on.
Okay. How many of you remember more about 9/11 that morning than you do about, let's say, last week Tuesday in the morning. Or last week Wednesday in the morning, most of it, right? So would anyone like to speak to that? Anyone have any theory as to why? Yes?
The emotional connection.
Okay.
It's strong,
Okay.
it's palpable, it's
Sure.
real, it's
Sure. When
like
we,
the day someone dies or the day you lose someone, it's the
Sure.
same thing. You remember that like yesterday.
very powerful, yes.
Mhm.
There's emotional, and the other word we're going to introduce a little bit later, from the word episode, is we have something in our memory, the deepest memory that we possess is called episodic. Episodic means it relates to an incident, right? If it's sort of disconnected, if it doesn't have context, I mentioned I think earlier, sometime I talked about a computer and folders and subfolders. Our brain works that way as well. When we can compartmentalize information, when we have a place to put it, you know, I think we might have a special folder called trauma, I'm not sure. But there are certain things where just, it's upfront and personal, whether on an individual level or a communal level. Sometimes we're at least able to put it into a context. For example, it's likely that you will remember the siblings, the names of siblings, where you already had an older brother or sister in your class or in your school. You'll remember the sibling's name faster than a random child who's the first child in that family coming to your class or school. Does that sound right to you? At least it worked that way for me. So if I had the older brother and I kind of like had a connection, I had a place to put this information. If not, I had to make a new folder. Not literally, but in my brain. I sort of like had to start again. There's this new entity called Greenberg. It doesn't fit into Goldstein, so I'm going to make a new folder called Greenberg. And that's okay, we like Greenberg. But Greenberg is not Goldstein, right? But Goldstein is Goldstein, and so I already have that, and I can sort of filter it into
But
that.
how do you stop calling that child by that brother's name?
That's a problem. And that's the flip side, I think, of that issue. How do you stop doing that if it's your own kid? I can't stop that one, then my kids kill me. I have that issue. But I think you spoke to some of the key points here. Emotions are one. You know, episode is certainly a piece of it as well. Here is a working definition for memory. Okay, retention of an ability to recall. So we got retention and recall. Information, experiences, and procedures. I don't remember where I got it from, probably some dictionary. Okay, retention of an ability to recall information, experiences, and procedures. Now, each of these are different, right? Information is content. That's probably most of what we want them to hold on to. Data, content, etc. Experiences, less so, at least in school. Doesn't mean we don't remember experiences, but we don't necessarily hold on to them as much in school because that's not what we say that we're really focused on, except for if we have a great presenter or something like a great event in school, like a feel-good type, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Team building or anything like that. That, of course, is experiential, and we want them to remember that too. We want them to have a lot of positive experience about school, but most of what we ask of their brains, most of what we ask of their memory, I think falls into the category of information and to a lesser degree, procedures. To a lesser degree, procedures. Procedures would be the things we want them to be able to do, right? Take the information, but apply it using the skills that they have. And those skills could be analytical skills, those skills could be how to blow a shofar, those skills could be how to use a microscope, those skills could be how to read a periodic table, it doesn't matter. Those are all skills, right? The information on the periodic table is the first part, right? Where's sulfur? Where's gold? Where's half the things I can't pronounce? You know, all those things, okay? Something after Einstein or whomever. Einsteinium, is that right? Did I get it? Okay. But be it as it may, this is what we want our kids' minds to do. So let's go through a few core principles quickly because I really want to get to the retention side, but I think it's important for us to know a little bit more about how memory works. So first we need to know that information is stored in multiple areas of the brain. Now I keep hearing statistics and data about how the brain has more capacity to remember information than, I guess, the most powerful computer out there, or certainly of the more powerful computers. Right? Computers can remember a lot, but our brains can remember even more. And sometimes I find that to be so hard to accept, because I don't feel like I'm anywhere close to have that level of recall. But that's what research is telling us. Okay? Now, because it's stored in multiple areas of the brain, it's also retrieved through multiple pathways, which means, in and of itself, what's the practical takeaway here? Think about both on the way in and the way out. Anyone like to comment?
You
Take a look over here for a second.
Multisensory.
Okay, multisensory, can you elaborate?
Meaning you could, a lot of times you need more than one way to teach it. You could, you know.
Right, right. Or we have, it's fascinating, we have something called modalities, intelligences. I'm sure you're all familiar, Howard Gardner. So when we talk about who's smart, ask the average kid who's smart. So typically they'll tell you the kid who's doing the 90+ work on the tests, things like that. They measure smart the way we train them to measure smart. As in, you're smart if you can do these particular things well. But what about the kid who can build a building? What about the kid who can draw some kind of fantastic artwork, whatever those might be? They have an intelligence that's unique and special, and in many ways may be superior to the intelligence of the child in your classroom who seems to be Mr. or Miss Very Smart. But because we limit how we measure intelligence, therefore the ability to demonstrate that is also limited. Does that make sense? The more we broaden not only our definitions, but also the more we broaden the way by which we give them access to information. If I taught this class today in Chinese, okay, I don't think anyone here would be feeling very smart. Frankly, I wouldn't be either, okay? But I don't think you would be, because the language would be a barrier for you. So if linguistically I'm not strong, but visually I am, and the teacher talks and talks and talks and doesn't offer the visual support, or I do best when I can, I saw this yesterday, unfortunately a person was collecting in Schwal who couldn't see. And so it reminded me of their ability to touch and their ability to distill information through their fingers that most of us probably couldn't. That's maybe a learned intelligence, but it's an intelligence. Okay? The more we can engage them in different ways, to your point, not multisensory, multimodality, etc., that's an important piece. That's how it comes in. Because information comes in a variety of ways. I take in information not just through my ears, through my eyes. I can taste, I can smell, and I can touch. All of our senses are portals for information. And we should remember that. Okay? But also the part I think that we're really after today is the retrieval side. Right? It doesn't help me that your memory is really good if it stops at ½ an inch before wherever that channel is that gets it out the mouth, right? Or out the hand. Then it's no good to me. The fact that you've got all of these gigabytes of content in your brain. What we want to be able to do is how do we create those pathways out? Okay? So what you need to remember is just because you tried one way doesn't mean there aren't other ways to also try. That's sort of the takeaway for the moment. Right? So if by speaking and sharing it verbally with you, that doesn't work, maybe I can give you some kind of descriptor of the setting, of the scene, and that might trigger your memory. I have memory that sort of works somewhat episodic, in the sense that I will oftentimes make phone calls from the car, hands-free. And in the process, I canvass the New York area for coaching and other work that I do, there are times where going to a particular location will remind me that I have to follow up with so-and-so. Because the last time I called that person, that's where I was. Sometimes you hear music in the car, and that triggers a memory, either in the car, it's association, right? But again, it's a pathway. It's how your brain brings it up. There was a woman who did a presentation in Chicago years ago when I was teaching in that city, and she talked about episodic, etc. She said that for a particular unit, I'm not sure how she pulled it off, and frankly, I wouldn't go there necessarily. She didn't change her outfit for the entire week or two. I think it was closer to 2. And she said, did you ever have a student who, in the middle of a test, is down, like doing his thing, right? And all of a sudden, he looks up at you, and almost like he's looking through you, puts his head back down and continues his test? That is a child who's connecting, who's retrieving through context, retrieving through episode, retrieving through setting. Okay? The teacher is not going to give, so to speak, that information, but seeing the teacher will be the pathway for that child, which is why testing research says always test in the room where you taught. We oftentimes take the kids and put them, I don't know, in the gym for standardized testing or things like that. That maybe for standardized testing that's okay because it's not really authentic instruction anyway, maybe. But other than that, final exams, classic example. We used to have, I don't know, X number of teachers giving the exam at the same time. And it's a problem because the classrooms are small. But instead of giving all of the sophomores their, I don't know, Jewish history exam at the same time, and you have 100 kids in the room, so you have to go to a gym, Maybe you have to give it a few different times. But it's ultimately what's better for the kids. It's something to think about. That makes sense? Okay, now, with our memory, we have what's called spatial and rote. You want spatial as much as you can. Spatial is the more organic, natural form of memory. Okay? It's engaging multiple senses and systems to make sense of an experience. Okay, and we'll hopefully have some examples of that soon. Whereas if something is artificial and external, it's a vocabulary list. The first 40 presidents, with George W. Bush's book out, the first 40, I guess it was Obama 44, is that right? I think George W. was 43. He just had a recent interview, wrote about his father 41, and that's the name of the book. Okay? But to list all the capitals of the states, these kinds of things. What can we do to get it out of rote? Even if it's just something like putting it to song. That's going to take it out of the very mechanical nature of A, B, C, D, and making it become more relevant. Okay? All those things are things we have to think about. Now, information flows through the brain through all the senses. We talked about this before. This picture over here, I think about this all the time. If I could take, I mentioned it earlier, if I could take some kind of cable, USB port, from here, right into your head, then we wouldn't need it. You'd come every morning, sort of like the electronic cars. You'd come, you charge your battery, you power up, right? I'd upload today's content, and you'd go home, right? But that's not how education works. It's not how it's ever going to work, I don't think. And I think that's a good thing in many ways. You never know, okay? I'm not making any predictions today. But you should realize all of your senses can integrate content. And we too often utilize not all five, or even close to all five. Just out of curiosity, how many of you would say that you consistently use sight? In other words, tap into a kid's ability to see and look at things as part of your teaching? I would think everybody, right? Mm-hmm. Hearing? Smelling?
We do.
You do? Well, yeah. Isn't it interesting?
In preschool we use all of it.
Okay, so I want to tell you something, because you mentioned that that's a good point, and I know that we have at least somebody in one special education, right? A number of you, I'm sure, as well. Rick Lavoie, who is a well-known educator and special needs advocate, has repeatedly said it in my presence, and I'm sure he said it many, many more times in other people's presence, that special education is just good education. That's his line. Okay? You probably have heard that from him. So the Americans with Disabilities Act might be designed to help people with disabilities, but in reality we all benefit if there are curb cuts, if there are those buttons you could hit when you have your handful of groceries, etc., etc. So everybody should follow the preschool model longer than we do. That's sort of what I want to say here. There are many things, besides the books that say everything I ever needed to learn, I learned in kindergarten. You're familiar with that. But it's more than that. It's that we somehow think that as the kids get more mature, we don't need to give them as much. So I'm here to say that that may not be true. It may not be as true as we think, especially today when they are so engaged with different modalities elsewhere. Right? Kids come home, they immediately open up their eyes, something. This tablet, that tablet, this device, right? You're trying to engage them with speaking and a little bit of hand motion, and they're like, like this all afternoon and evening. Good luck, right? It's a complete decided disadvantage in that regard. So the more we can do. Now, smelling doesn't always fit, but I will tell you, I remember a lot of things through a smell, right? If you ever smell a really musty carpet, a really bad perfume, or really, I don't know what. I don't want to give you all the options. You can get your own imagination. Oftentimes, that'll trigger you back to your childhood. It'll bring you back to some moment. Not always good, sometimes great, but the smell will make the connection for you in many cases. Tasting, right? Now again, does tasting work with biology? Maybe sometimes, certainly fits into biology content-wise. Does it fit into Baba Kama? Maybe yes, maybe no, depends. You have to be creative and think about it. And it may not apply all the time. But these two for sure. Touching can be helpful at times as well. It's good to think in terms of senses and something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's go back for a second. From our senses, it goes into your short-term memory. Right, and again, that's the data that catches our attention. We talk about 2 billion pieces of information. Most of them don't catch your attention. There are things happening in this room right now to everybody, and we're not focused on them, because you're all focused on my tie, clearly. But the weather, right, the temperature, the books all around, the various other aspects of the furniture. There are a lot of things in here, and you're ignoring them, and that's okay. And I keep bringing back to your attention, which I shouldn't. But I'm only doing that for the purpose of letting you know that your brain is a filter. And of course, you want to make sure that filter is the right thing. So in short-term memory, the data that it holds on to is very limited. You know, for those of us who are old enough to remember a time when New York City had, I think, one area code. And the way that phone numbers were distinguished in many cases, at least the way people held on to it, is that the first two numbers were letters. So my grandparents who lived in the Bronx, their first two letters were TU. I don't know what TU stood for. TU, whatever, then 4 digits. And I assume the reason for that is because it was easier for people to remember. I think our minds can hold on to 7 or 8 pieces of information. So once you throw in an area code, that's where it goes sideways for me every time. So you got to remember the area code. So if you remember that, that's 1 piece, and then you've got 7 more. If you can't remember that, you're following what I'm saying here? So as the information is small and little tidbits, if we can't somehow find a way to glue it together for them, it's going to be harder for them to hold on.
Usually, like something like the area code is more like a category as opposed to a number.
Yeah, if you know the area code. If you know the area code. Right, so then it can become 1 piece of information. But it's not 0, it's something, okay? I still have to go into my phone, right? How often do people say, text me the number, right? Because you're afraid that if you try to do it by memory, by the time you hang up with the guy, you've already lost that information. Same idea, okay? 7 independent items at a time, very brief, you can hold on to it up to a half a minute. Basically services as a scratch pad, okay? Now what happens after it gets into your short-term memory? Some of it goes into your long-term memory. A lot of it you lose. Okay? What is the thing that you're going to hold on to? Usually the things that will help you in the future. Sort of like the Chazal that says that there were double the number of Nevi'im as there were Yotzei Mitzrayim, but the only Nevuos, the only prophecies that we recorded were the ones that would be useful to Klal Yisrael in the future. Sort of that idea, but on a much more personal level. So the more that we can get children to drive information into that large area of the cortex where they have that capacity to hold on to it for much longer, that obviously is our goal. That's what we want them to do. This way you can talk to them a week after the test and it's still there. Isn't that unbelievable? Okay, any questions or comments here before we move on? Now, the working memory is what allows all of this to occur. Okay, that's the system that's holding on to information. I'm not a brain researcher. I don't really know all of the technical aspects of how the brain is working, but we do have to be able to we have to be aware that our working memory can only hold on to so much at a time. And that's important for us because, for example, as I mentioned earlier, as we share information with our students, we want to make sure that they master what we've taught before we teach them something additional. Because what's going to happen often is the new information will delete the old information. If you go to shul every day in the morning, so today's experience, maybe you'll hold on to it, it will delete yesterday's experience. Unless today you do something different. I daven in a different shul today than I normally daven. So I may not forget yesterday because today's is sort of in a different place. But if every day I go to the same shul, kind of like that old guy in the commercials from Dunkin' Donuts, time to make the donuts. Everyone remembers that. Okay. After a while, I'm dating myself just a little bit here, but after a while, it's day after day. It's sort of rote, and there's no reason for you to hold on to that. But if there was an experience in shul, if there was something that's valuable to you, met somebody you haven't seen in 20 years, or you had a communication, a conversation with somebody that could help you with your professional practice. Or something. You met up with the Rebbe and he had a conversation with you about your son, which of course Rebbe love to do in shul with parents. We know that. Okay, all these kinds of things. So that might hold on, be able to hold on to that a little bit longer. So again, as we talked about, can't stay on this slide for very long, but our brain really does have a lot of parallels with a computer. Okay? More than we typically think. Now, this one you don't have. We have permanent, we have temporary, and so your brain will hold on to things for the short term, balancing various responsibilities as it's doing its functions, and then certain things get saved. And the things that you save are the things you can hold on to, right? How do we save it to our brain is what we're looking to do in this conversation. All right? Now, from a memory perspective, there are three categories. There's must be great teaching in this school. There's declarative. I used to go here, so I can say that. Declarative means a lot of the facts, who, what, where, when, and how. Semantic as well as episodic. Okay, so semantic is going to be, as we talk about semantics, that it's, I guess you would say, more language-based. Tends to be our knowledge of information, of meanings, understandings, things like this. And then you have episodic, which we talked about earlier. Episodic is, I remember, based on an experience. There's declarative, which means what I can, I guess, declare, what I can say, what I can bring back from experience. There's also procedural. Procedural is how we do things. And many times procedural is not something we can necessarily explain. Okay, would you like to explain how to ride a bike, please? Can you ride a bike? You can ride a bike. Okay, can you explain it to others? You probably could. You just have to think about it and put your steps in order. And you might have to grab a bike and do it again, and this time take notes. Right?
You can't fully explain it because balance is more of a science.
Well, okay, so you put balance in there as one of the items, but okay. But it's procedural, right? Now, procedural is important memory because that's what allows us, in many cases, to do things. Procedural is oftentimes associated with skills and how to hold something, how to do something. Right? That's a form of memory too. Every time I want to write, I see a lot of people right now are writing. Every time, chas v'shalom, we know that there are people out there who have a stroke. And when that happens, oftentimes their brain, so to speak, forgets procedural memory. So you have to reteach such individuals how to walk. You have to reteach them how to write. Right? Things we take for granted every single day, grab the keys out of my car, turn the thing, time to go to Shachar, whatever it is. And we go through our routine. We have to reteach ourselves those basics if we get to such a level. And oftentimes for kids, you're teaching it for the first time. How to get dressed. Right? Every day we get dressed in the morning, we don't think twice about it, other than maybe what we're wearing. But we don't think really about how we're going to put it on, unless it's very unusual. Okay? So when we talk about long-term memory, storage was one, retrieval is the other. We've discussed these. Deletion is the third. Okay? And our brain goes through a lot of deletion. Sometimes that is good.
Why do all the kids know how to do that one?
They do. Well, actually, they're not deleting. They're just not entering. You know, you have to enter before you get delete. You're not. That's really what it is. And we're not encouraging enough of that processing. Okay? So why do we forget? Here it is. Okay? And probably the last slide we're going to do today because of time. Okay? Weak encoding is number one. Right? If we don't bring it in properly, then of course we're not going to hold on. It's imagine, for example, you do the work on your computer and you just don't hit the save button and you close. That's weak encoding. Number two is I don't have a way by which to bring it back. There's nothing that's helping me draw it out. Because again, we haven't yet scientifically figured out, at least I don't know that we have, a way by which to hit the search button on your brain and find where in the cortex that information lies. It very well may be there. We all have heard the stories of the people who have gone through traumatic experiences and they recreate situations from their youth or whatever it might be that they'd long forgotten about, but it was buried somewhere deep in their brains and they just never had a retrieval cue. And somehow this experience brought it back for them. Right? We replace a lot of information with newer information. I talked about davening. If every day I go to shul, same minyan, same time, why would I remember yesterday's experience? So when I asked you before about 9/11 versus last Tuesday, because what would distinguish last Tuesday from last Wednesday? Typically nothing. So it sort of falls into this big blur, and we forget about it. But if last Tuesday was the wedding of a child or a sibling or something, then last Tuesday would be something we'd hold on to for a while. It really depends on what last Tuesday is all about. Elapsed time is certainly a factor, and that's why review is so important. And it's important for us this is sort of a curricular conversation, but it is important, I think, for us to bring back things that we feel are really essential. The fact that I taught it in September doesn't make it less important in January. I just don't have the context to teach it again because I taught it already, but I might just do a brief review. Or I might say to them, I'm going to do something else that will reconnect them with previous learning. But these are strategies to help our students hold on to it. And maybe if you read it this way, it might be better. I wrote a little story about it because I wanted to sort of pull it all together. And it was my way of trying to use the...
Is it in here?
It isn't. It isn't, but it's cute anyway, I think. John was struggling to hold on to the information that he was learning in school. His teacher told him to try to organize and order it. John wasn't sure how to do that, so he grabbed a funnel. You all know what a funnel is? Okay? Which, and again, you not know what all this means, but hopefully some of it will make sense to you. And some mental glue, or some glue, and decided that he was going to group together everything that he learned. This was an active process. By the way, if you haven't figured it out, every bold word is reflective of one of those 12. He used a web, imagine the web graphic organizer, to cluster it all together so that he could visualize it. He also recited it aloud. Doing this helped him achieve clarity and understanding. John loved to do this so much, he began overlearning everything, and even created mnemonic devices and composed songs with that information. John became a very successful student. He seemed to remember